The real story behind this iconic horror movie is even scarier than the film. Most horror movie buffs have seen 2013's The Conjuring and the spin-offs it's inspired, with macabre characters such as the Nun and the wildly unpleasant Annabelle. Keep that thing far away from us, please. Excited viewers have been enveloped in this paranormal world for almost a decade, but not every viewer knows the dark truth that sparked the series. Several of these blockbuster smash hits feature the characters Ed and Lorraine Warren, who were real American paranormal investigators active during the 70s and 80s. When things ran amok in the paranormal world, the Warrens came to the rescue. Those vengeful spirits really put these two through the ringer. Though 2004's Saw is what really put director James Wan on the map, his name was praised everywhere with the 2013 release of The Conjuring. But this story didn't completely come from the sinister inner workings of Wan's mind. In the 50s, Ed, a World War II veteran and former cop, and his psychic wife Lorraine began collaborating professionally and supernaturally. In fact, Ed and Lorraine Warren are still known as prominent experts in the field of demonology. The couple founded the New England Society of Psychic Research in 1952. With the help of Lorraine's clairvoyant skills and Ed's deep knowledge of demonology and ghost hunting, they tackled several paranormal cases, including the infamous 1974 Amityville hauntings. But before the Warrens tackled the notorious Amityville horror house, the Perron family of Harrisville, Rhode Island, begged them for help. It began when the family of 7 moved into a roomy farmhouse in 1971. Carolyn, Roger, and their 5 daughters were almost immediately harassed by paranormal troublemakers in the 14-room house. Carolyn would notice brooms mysteriously go missing, hear unexplained scraping noises in the vacant kitchen, and see tiny piles of dirt form in the center of said kitchen floor. If only things stayed this mundanely ghostly. But the eeriness amplified when the girls caught ghost sightings around the house, and some of these entities were vengeful. These ghosts had nothing in common with sweet little Casper. After several incidents, Carolyn decided to do some research on the house's past. Apparently, the farmhouse had been in the same family for 8 generations, many of its previous residents passing under nameless, horrific circumstances. These unexplained deaths sadly consumed the children, as several kitties mysteriously drowned in a nearby creek. One was murdered, and, brace yourselves, others hanged themselves in the home's attic. The poor parents were undoubtedly questioning everything about their move. If you've seen the film, you'll get chills just thinking about the honorary villain Bathsheba, who was the worst presence of them all. Well, she was allegedly a real person, named Bathsheba Sherman, and resided on the parents' property during the mid-1800s. Did we mention that she was a rumored Satanist? Yeah, and evidence shows that she may have been involved in the death of her neighbor's child. Her body lies in a Baptist cemetery in downtown Harrisville. Though her body remained at peace, her spirit was busy terrorizing the parents. Whoever the spirit was, she perceived herself to be mistress of the house, and she resented the competition my mother posed for that position, said Andrea Perron, the eldest daughter. Andrea recalled frequently whiffing the scent of rotting flesh in the home and seeing beds levitate off the ground. Her father would feel a cold, stinking presence behind him whenever he'd take a trip down to the basement. There came a point where the Warrens had to intervene. When Lorraine organized a seance to attempt to calm these, impassioned spirits, Carolyn Perron soon became possessed, speaking in tongues and levitating in her chair. Though Andrea was not part of the seance, she claims to have witnessed the terror. My mother began to speak a language not of this known world in a voice not her own. Her chair levitated and she was thrown across the room, she said. In The Conjuring, Ed Warren is seen performing an exorcism, but this was fabricated. Lorraine clarified that the couple would never attempt one, as they're meant to be performed by Catholic priests only. After the real-life seance gone wrong, however, Roger kicked the Warrens out, worried for his wife's mental health. Due to debilitating financial issues, the Perron family couldn't move out of the godforsaken house until 1980. By that point, the demons must have gotten bored with the parents, as the haunting stopped. Meanwhile, an Enfield, England family's paranormal nightmare had just begun. In August of 1977, the Hodgson family started experiencing things that paralleled the Perron family happenings. In a 2016 sequel, which was surprisingly as good as its predecessor, The Conjuring 2 addressed the miserable events endured by this British family. 11-year-old Jane Hodgson remembers waking in the middle of the night to see her dresser sliding across the floor of her and her brother's bedroom. Her mother was really frightened when they began hearing eerie knocking coming from random places in the house. Assuming burglars were knocking, she called the police, but there were no humans scheming a break-in, and the police soon realized this as well. An officer was shocked to witness a chair rise from the floor and move around the room on its own. Reporters from the Daily Mirror were invited to bask in the nightmare alongside the Hodgsons and record the details of their experience. According to reports, Legos and marbles flew around the room, apparently scorching the hands of those who attempted to pick them up. Lights flickered, the sound of invisible hounds barking filled the room, previously folded clothing would fly through the air, coins would mysteriously drop from the ceiling, and furniture would spin or fall over unprompted. But it wasn't until the iron fireplace was inexplicably ripped out of the wall that international paranormal investigators raised some eyebrows. After several unsuccessful visits from said investigators, many concluded that the children concocted some fake paranormal storyline, especially consider one child admitted to lying. This is where the Warrens come in, as they weren't so quick to point fingers at the kids. Though they believed there was in fact some malicious presence causing a ruckus in the Hodgson home, a noted skeptic accused Ed of stretching the truth and propelling false incidents. The Warrens' findings were brushed over, and the hauntings suddenly stopped in 1979. Whether or not you believe in the Warrens' supernatural work, they have undeniably become prominent figures in pop culture and paranormal history. They're practically the demonology poster children. Skeptic or not, anyone would have begged for the Warrens' help upon coming into contact with the infamous life-size haunted doll, simply known as Robert. We already have very prominent goosebumps. Gene Otto, or Gene as he preferred it, was an eccentric artist who came from a prominent family in Key West, Florida. When he was a young boy, his grandfather gave him an unusual doll for his birthday. That doll would eventually gain a reputation for being one of the spookiest toys ever made. The doll was manufactured by Steiff, a popular German toy manufacturer that was known for inventing the teddy bear. Although the doll wasn't meant to be sold as a toy, Gene's grandfather managed to purchase it from the company anyway. Gene immediately developed an unhealthy attachment to his new friend, and according to stories, the doll, aptly named Robert, started to take on a haunting personality of its own. But that was impossible, right? Gene dressed up Robert in one of his old sailor suits and carried it around everywhere he went. He formed an extreme attachment to it, and the doll in turn seemed to be just as smitten with its human companion. Gene's love of his new toy went far beyond infatuation. He would carry it with him up and down the streets wherever he went, and he talked to people about the doll as if it were actually a living being. Then odd things began happening in the Otto household. Items would frequently move locations, and strange noises were heard throughout the home. Gene's parents naturally believed their son was behind the mischief. Gene, however, would always blame the commotion on Robert. At first, his parents chalked it up to a wild imagination, until they noticed odd things happening even when their son wasn't home. The creepy occurrences continued as their son grew older too. One theory was that a Bahamian girl who used to work for Robert's parents placed a voodoo curse on the doll after they wronged her. Of course, this was never proven to be true. Disturbing incidents seemed to happen whenever Robert was around. Once a plumber who was working on the Otto family's home reported hearing the laughter of a child before Robert the doll mysteriously moved across the room into a different chair. As Gene grew older, he eventually moved out of his parents' house and into a large home in Key West, Florida. Gene was happy he was finally on his own, and of course he brought his old doll along with him. As an adult, Gene no longer carried Robert with him everywhere he went, though he was still attached to the doll. He fixed a room on the top floor of his home for the toy, making sure it had everything it needed so it didn't feel lonely and neglected. Gene placed the doll in a chair that faced out the top window. People on the street took notice of it, and pretty soon they started avoiding the house altogether. Some people claimed they could see it move on its own. Others said they felt it watching them as they passed. Gene's wife, in the center of this photo here, whom he married many years before he moved to Key West, also began resenting the doll and everything it seemed to stand for. She eventually made Gene store it in the attic, secluded from the public. After Gene and his wife's deaths in 1974, a woman named Myrtle Reuter moved into the Key West home. The home came partially furnished, and it also came with Robert. Myrtle had no idea of the doll's spooky history. The doll remained stashed in the attic of the home for nearly 20 years. Over the course of that time, Myrtle noticed odd sounds and misplaced items, and eventually she donated Robert to the Fort East Martello Museum in Florida. She felt it truly was haunted. The museum was of course happy to accept the mysterious new addition to their collection. Of course, the employees figured Myrtle was just extremely paranoid. There was no way the doll was actually possessed, right? Almost immediately after Robert arrived at the museum, lines formed out the door to see it. Even though the building didn't advertise the new arrival at all, word quickly spread that it was displaying a haunted doll. Everyone wanted to take a picture with Robert. They were intrigued by its mysterious and supposedly haunted past. Some even claimed their electronics would strangely act up when they approached the glass encasement. Visitors would even write letters to the inanimate object asking its forgiveness, especially when it came to taking its picture without asking. They didn't want any sort of bad luck headed their way. To this day, Robert remains at the Fort East Martello Museum in Florida. People from all over still visit it, hoping to catch a glimpse of some paranormal activity. The doll, now 115 years old, still manages to spook those who dare to get close to it.